to Geographers in Practice. I'm Sarah Elwood. I'm a faculty member in the department. I'm the chair. And as I look around the room, I see a lot of current students and alumni, friends from campus and the community, and I am delighted to see all of you. Our colleague, Ed Taylor, who's the Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Academic Affairs and a Professor of Education, is going to introduce our speakers and the event tonight, but I got up here first because there's a lot of people to thank when you put on an event like this. So the geography staff, Nell Gross, Karwaki Martin, Sharon Frucci, Lisa Sturdivant, and then some colleagues of the department, Valdemar Zamudio, Kian Flynn, and Ayanda Masalela are helping us put on the event, along with some colleagues from the College of Arts and Sciences. So thanks very much to all of them, and most especially to Nell Gross, who has been just a terrific partner in putting on the event tonight. We've got 4 alumni mentors who have been working with our Career Pathways for Geographers class this quarter. They're Helen Olson, Julie Blakesley, Haneen Al-Hassani, and Elise Kelly. I've seen Elise, but Helen, Julie, and Haneen, are you here this evening? We will thank them at another time. And especially I want to thank the geography faculty and grad students and our undergraduate geography group, Plenum, way to go Plenum, for helping us fill the room tonight. So, on behalf of everybody in the department, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Ed Taylor.
Can you hear me okay? So, I'm going to read a few things about our panelists, but let me set a little context and just tell you, first of all, this kind of thing inspires. And I'll tell you why. First, to stand here, it's a Thursday night, and there are a lot of things that are going on campus, and this room is full. I mean, it's standing room only, and you all showed up tonight to hear geographers in practice talk to them and talk to you. And so that inspires me. It inspires me that some of you, including our panel, but some of you are alum. There are people in the room who got invited and you came back after 10, 20, 30 years because you want to be here and support students. There are other things you can do, but that inspires me. It inspires me that there are students here, and in my role, I get to welcome a lot of students to the university, and it's such a powerful thing when students choose to come here and then choose to study something, and a major in this case, that as I've talked to many of you that are in the major in geography, this wasn't necessarily your first choice. Many of you didn't know you wanted to study this. How many of you would say that you didn't know you were going to study geography when you came here? Didn't know. But you discovered this major, which means something happened, something triggered for you. And I heard the story over and over and over again. Something really powerful happened for you, which tells me a story about teaching, tells me a story about curriculum, tells me a story about guidance and advising in a community that comes together and kind of holds you. What inspires me is when community comes together. And this kind of a concept, because this is the first time you've done this. And the very first time you've got a full room, and I think that's really, really impressive. And this kind of thing inspires me. And it inspires me when we're bold enough to look kind of this three-dimensional, the past and the present, who we are now, and to look out into the future. So when you invite alum to come together and we're bold enough to say, let's talk about your experience here and where you think you're going, that you have panelists that say yes and spend the evening with us together. So a little context. Across generations of students and faculty, our department, geography, has sustained commitments to connecting research to action, working for social and spatial justice, and using spatial thinking as a basis for understanding and acting on urgent societal problems. Our graduates and professionals and civic commitments have transformative impacts in housing, health, environmental sustainability, labor rights, social justice, racial justice, immigration, empowerment, geospatial analytics, urban development, and much more. Tonight we open up a window into some of the impacts on our region, our state, and beyond. So we'll hear the reflections of three geographers in practice. Our discussants. We'll talk about what inspires them, what impacts they most want to make, And it'll also reflect on their pathways from where you are to where they are now to the present. Training as a geographer means building powerful concepts and modes of explanation, robust analytical skills, and an integrative approach to understanding complex worlds. Our discussions will open up how they've translated all of this into their own professional and life pathways. This evening is a chance to learn from a range of inspirations and impacts catalyzed by UW geographers who practice. It's a chance to learn more about how our graduates ground their learning in multiple worlds after they graduate. And one of the things that's been impressive just in me looking at some of the notes and background on our panelists, they're doing really important things with their degrees. They're doing important things in the world. They're doing important things in our community. And you'll also hear them talk about things that they're doing in their personal lives that are just about service and commitment to the well-being of our community. An example I hope that you all take us to. So let me start with Isaiah Bird. Isaiah works at the Office of Washington State Auditor as a performance auditor, where he evaluates the effectiveness and performance of state agencies serving people in Washington. In this role, Isaiah researches best practices, analyzing state data, and helps develop and present recommendations to the state legislature on a range of different topics, including K-12 education, cybersecurity, watershed management, and long-term care. Isaiah earned his master's in public administration and bachelor's in geography from the University of Washington. Isaiah is drawn to public service and has previously served in the Army as an intelligence analyst. When he's not chasing around his 4-year-old daughter, Isaiah dabbles with, quote, artsy-fartsy street photography and improv comedy. Jacob Gonzalez. Jacob, would you wave? Jacob is a senior planner for the city of Pasco, working on updates to city zoning regulations, transportation, planning efforts, and economic development strategies. Jacobs has had several GIS and planning related positions, the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, Puget Sound Regional Council, and Seattle Public Utilities. Jacob has served on the board of United Way of Benton and Franklin counties, the Census Transportation Planning Committee as chair of the Downtown Pasco Development Authority. Jacob spends his free time traveling and responding to multiple group texts on WhatsApp. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts in Geography from the University of Washington and is currently studying for his American Institute of Certified Planners accreditation. And in the middle, Natasha Rivers is a senior analyst and consultant of demographic data and housing. She was a lead demographer for Seattle schools and recently began a new position with BECU. She is civically engaged and has served on several community boards. Natasha earned her PhD in geography from UCLA and completed two postdoctoral research associate appointments, one at the Minnesota Population Center and the other at the University of Washington Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. Dr. Rivers is a partner with Social Venture Partners and co-chaired SVP Fast Pitch 2018. She is a Leadership Tomorrow alum, co-founder of www.ourseattlescene.com. She is currently on the board of trustees of Seattle Children's Theater and board of directors of For Culture. That is our panel. So thank you, and please welcome our panel.
Now, we're hopeful that microphones pointing in our direction that you'll be able to hear us. How is it in the back?
Not very good.
Not very good. Okay. Then it may be that we're going to pass these around. I didn't think about the wisdom of having to present next to somebody who does stand-up comedy. So we're about to be out. The pressure is on. So some things about how this evening is going to go. I've got a small number of open-ended questions for our panelists. I'll pose those one at a time and let them take those prompts where they will. We'll do that until probably 7:15 or a little after, and then we'll open it up to you for your questions. So, geographers in practice. My first question for you, I'd love to hear you reflect on what professional or community activities are most important to you, and what are the inspirations that led you on those paths? And we do not have to go in order.
Oh no, I wasn't necessarily trying to go first, but I was like, can we also see the questions too? So I guess I'll start. Hi, thank you for coming tonight. So as he mentioned, I do serve on several community boards, and it kind of started off with like the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and just wanting to get more civically engaged with like the Central District, and sort of around that time where the neighborhood started gentrifying and changing a little bit, I wanted to sort of make an impact by volunteering my time and expertise there. But then I also moved into the arts world because I love to create art and I write fiction as well, and I've published some things in that space. And so being a part of the Seattle Children's Theater and for culture has allowed me to sort of like explore the arts boards and how art reaches different communities and the impact that arts has on education and things like that.
I guess I can go. Hi everybody, I'm good on this mic? Awesome. Thank you for being here. I think what I enjoy the most, and probably the thing that probably drives me the most and what I do on a day-to-day basis, is probably sharing with the community how rules and regulations that the city or county or any local government has a significant impact on how they're able to live their daily lives. So for the two core students that I was bugging just before this event, I was venting to them about municipal codes and how they need to be changed, and so I apologize for that. But it's significant in how that impacts where we live, where we work, how we get to our office, how we pick up our children from daycare, or if there's fields nearby, if it's a safe walk nearby, and there's an actual code in each city, should be, that dictates what that walk should be like. And it's very important for the community to be involved. So I enjoy connecting folks, hopefully making them angry enough to work with me to change city regulations and codes.
Hi, I'm Isaiah. And so professionally, I have always been drawn to positions and to work that sort of intersects like policy questions. So, as long as I can remember, I've been really passionate about public policy. My most recent role, so I actually just left the state auditor's office a couple weeks ago, and so I was there for about 4 years. And I think the thing that really, so in that role, I did a lot of research on government programs and agencies, and it's a very nonpartisan. We had to sign an attestation once a month saying that we're free of bias. So Republican, Democrat, those type of questions are just off the table, and yet there's real implications on programs that are political. And I think one thing that I really enjoyed professionally is asking those really difficult questions about how a certain policy impacts different types of people. And I think that professionally, in all the different roles I've had, has really been something that I have been passionate about, is sort of highlighting those type of political questions, and not necessarily driving that, but making sure that people are aware of some of the impacts that a program or a agency's action has had. And then in my private life, I volunteer on the board of directors for the Eastside Community Council, which is fun and frustrating. It's definitely all of the negative and positives of community councils are there. There's a lot of NIMBYism, and it's fun to be there. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to ask you a question that any of us who has ever pursued a degree in geography has had to answer. Why geography? What drew you?
I wanted to start with civil engineering. I like bridges and skyscrapers. And then I took math and chemistry and said, maybe not. But it actually helped, kind of going through that process. And then a good friend of mine who was probably one of the first GIS students of the geography department, we were at Odegaard, and he told me to check out this cool mapping software. ArcMap or ArcView at the time. Neato, that's pretty cool, right? And I thought, I was like, well, you know, maybe I don't want to build a bridge, I just want to know where we should put it to serve the most people. And through the geography department, it actually allowed me to get pretty diverse in the number of topics and courses and classes that we all go through, and it really helped me narrow it down exactly what it is that I want to do with my life. And so it was being at Odegaard at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday and seeing Esri on the computer screen that really flipped the switch for me. Very thankful for that.
So that image of like being at Odegaard and just like staring at Esri, like I think that really like subconsciously, I think there was an imprint there that I didn't realize at the time, because you totally nailed it. My first like right after high school, I joined the Army, and I didn't know what GIS was. I just knew that I mapped signals, and I found out where they were on the map. In retrospect, I was using, you know, a French version of ArcMap, but it took me a while to get to UW, but once I got there, I was like, well, what do I know already? I know how to do some maps. I didn't have any experience with Esri, but as soon as I started taking classes, it was like, I just felt like at home, like, okay, I can play around with maps all day, so.
I had a different experience. So I think I started undergrad here in 2001, and I had done this program called UDoc when you were in high school, so I thought I was going to do pre-med or do something in the medical field or maybe even in business. And then I started at UW, and I didn't do that well or find much interest in some of the courses I was taking until spring quarter. I took a class on globalization and finally started to learn about the world outside of Seattle and just sort of like the core, the periphery, what it meant to be relatively impoverished, inequality, sort of like the unequal distribution of resources, things like that. And after taking that course, I actually declared geography that spring. And I don't quite know how I came to where I am today, but I do like geography a lot. I mean, I got a lot of degrees in it. But I can't quite tell you what it was, but I think it was just sort of finally making sense of the world around me. And those questions were all answered, I think, in just that one course, and so I wanted to explore it a little bit deeper.
You look like you had something more to say.
No, I'm good. I mean, the geography department throughout there's so many different courses, and it really allows you to become broad in nature, which obviously is helpful in the workforce. But yeah, I guess the folks that I worked with, the geography department professors, advisors, were always, I was very curious, and I kept asking more and more questions, and they kept answering them, so I kept asking more, and that's really helpful. It might upset your boss in the workforce, but if your intent is good, then your boss shouldn't care. And if he doesn't care, then you got to find your boss, right? And so it's really, I think a combination of all of our responses, what I heard was getting down to the root issue of whatever the challenge is, and I think the diversity of the work we do in the geography department helps, I guess, to flush that out a little bit, right? To really think collaboratively with different folks, different mindsets, and different data and different concepts to really find what the answer might be.
That's a wonderful segue into the next question I wanted to ask you. How does your training as geographers shape what you do and how you do it today? And this is the part where I look away, so you have 30 seconds to think. 1,000 to 1,000. So, how does your training as geographers shape what you do and how you do it?
Let's see here. So I just recently left the Seattle School District, so I was a demographer there. And after completing my PhD and doing a postdoc here, I didn't quite know what I was going to do. I just knew there wasn't really a space in the academic world for me, and I wanted to do something that was more applied and I could see a direct impact on my work. So it was actually the geography department that reached out to me because the school district was looking for a demographer. They had just finished writing the job description. I didn't even know what a demographer was or that I was it. But once I started that role, I just kind of was able to make it my own. And I think now there's just a lot more opportunities for geographers and demographers because of roles like that and the impact that those first sort of people made for whatever city, county, or level of work that they joined. But basically how I used it was I built a lot of partnerships. So a lot of people are like, how do you forecast school enrollment? It's not just based on numbers or models, but it's also sort of figuring out what private developers are doing or what nonprofit housing providers are doing. Because essentially with all the growth that's happening in the city, a lot of populations are displaced, but there's ways to sort of curb that displacement by talking to folks, getting resources. So, you know, the homeless student population was growing quite a bit for the school district. So working with McKinney-Vento and Seattle Housing Authority, all those partnerships really matter in terms of like educating families and sort of keeping that population here. And I can go into detail about that, but essentially it's just like applying what you know about housing market, labor market, job market, and bringing it to a department that's going to impact all these different neighborhoods in the city. Having that knowledge makes the work a lot more fun, and people take you seriously because they're like, oh, you have knowledge of all these different moving parts. And so I think geography just gives you a broad knowledge of how a city is planned and ran. And every school district, I think at this point, probably either consults with a demographer or has one in-house.
I think to echo a little bit of what Natasha just said, I think being resourceful has been pretty helpful. Obviously, the diversity of courses that we go through is helpful, but you know, I find myself on a daily basis in a position where there's a lot of folks that maybe aren't too happy with the discussions that I'm bringing up to attention based on there's a fear of change in my community. We've done it this way for a long time. Not much of an issue on their, from what they perceive, but the reality is there is. You know, I'm 200 miles away from Seattle, but there's an affordable housing crisis where I live. There's a homeless crisis where I live. There's a transportation problem where I live. There's an equitable development problem where I live. And it's scaled differently, obviously, because the populations are different, but being able to point out that there's an issue, and then I can, because of my GIS background, I can go map it out. And then because I took courses on technical writing and technical documentation, I can provide the methodology in a clear and concise way for the engineers to understand. And because we did presentations in the GIS workshop course, I am able to go present to our city council and present it eloquently and share a story. And I feel like geography allows us to share a story about anything that exists because it can be mapped. And so I think all that information and that experience of being a student here through the different projects, working in class groups or whatever it may be, internships, it helps me on a daily basis because I have to rely on myself, because if my coworkers don't feel the urgency to do it, that's not an excuse for us not to fix a problem that's impacting people in our community. So I get kind of angry when I have coworkers that feel like they don't want to change something, because why work for the city if you don't want to make it better? And I think we've all kind of thrown out things, whether it's the Eastside Community Council or your work with SPU, but why does your city look the way it does? And there's a reason for that. And I feel very humbled to work in a position where I actually can answer and hopefully address some of those issues. I don't think I would have had this same impact if I was a civil engineer, and I don't think I would have had the same impact or have the same impact if I did straight planning. I think the diversity of the geography allows me to be valuable in all these different sectors, and it kind of helps me get along with different departments too, because I'm kind of a blend. And that's kind of what the geography department offers to a lot of students. It's pretty valuable.
So at the state auditor's office, most people wouldn't think that has much to do with geography, but the position is that I just left is performance auditing. So we look at government programs, state programs, and state agencies. And ultimately, it's what are the services they're providing, and are they effective and efficient, and are they doing what they're supposed to do? And that has geography written all over it, because people are served all across the state, and I think the perspective or the geography lens has allowed me to help shape some of the agency's work in the type of questions that we're answering. Because auditing is essentially you ask a question and then you create criteria and then you answer the question. It doesn't meet this criteria or not. And so some examples are, we looked at the certification process for how home care aides are certified, because there weren't enough of them, and there was issues with how long it was taking them to get certified. And so we did a survey, and we kind of did all this typical research on how home care aides are getting certified. But one of the issues in the survey was it's too long to get to the testing site. And so that's a simple geography question. Is what's the routing, what's the network, where are people trying to get tested, and how far is it? Where can we put new testing locations? And so, even though that wasn't a core part of the audit, bringing those issues in kind of side channels to the agency and being like, here's what we heard, and we think you'd benefit from changing your location for these testing sites. Those are the type of sort of real-world problems that I think having a geography lens, because no one else, in the department had any idea that this, they didn't see it as like a big problem. But if you're asking those spatial questions, more often than not, there's a huge spatial component to public policy. So I think just knowing where to kind of poke and being like, I don't know the answer, I don't know if this is a problem, but we should look here because, this could be a problem of where people are located compared to services. So I think those type of things have really are useful in the public sector.
A couple weeks ago, we had a practice for geographers in practice. And one of the things that I remember you all saying around this question was, in common across the really different things that you do, your job is to ask the hard questions, whether about how the world works and why it works that way. Whether or not folks really want to have that question asked. So it ties those things together. So what impacts are you most passionate about making in the world?
So I have a public policy lens and a geography lens. And for me, there is a big tension between sort of this theory, this social science theory, and public policy. Because public policy is all about condensing complex ideas into simplicity. And often that loses, context. And I think that being able to say, this is too simple, this isn't good enough, we need to bring up whether it's disparate impact, how services are provided, whether it's the nuance of how a policy affects different types of people. I really think it's important to take apart simplicity and to lay it on the table for decision makers, because I think more often than not, they want to know that stuff, they're busy, and they're not going to do it. I think having the skills to present, to essentially pull apart problems and let people see them. I don't know if that was too abstract, but.
That's great. I don't know. Let's see. I could talk about my board work a little bit. So the reason why I joined Seattle Children's Theater was really, they have an access program So essentially, families that have EBT cards can pay for up to 10 cars for $10. So it just means that more kids get to experience professional theater that weren't there before. So I co-chair like the EDI committee and basically sort of think of ways to bring more equity into like professional theater. For culture, there was an initiative that was on the ballot a couple years ago, Cultural Access for Washington, and it didn't pass because the way it would have worked out had it passed is that a lot of the arts organizations that are already well funded, like the ballet and Pacific Science Center, would have gotten most of the funding. And when you think about King County, there's a lot of arts and cultural centers that a lot of people don't know about, but there's still artists developing themselves and sort of sharing art with their communities. And so by joining For Culture, I get to sort of be a part of remaking that effort to span across different geographies and different neighborhoods so that people know when it's on the ballot that they'll also receive money as well. I currently work for BECU for the social impact team, and basically that's just BECU Care, so their philanthropy, their financial education and literacy programs. Essentially, I get to measure that impact and sort of identify areas where we could grow. Now, given that it's a co-op, it's member-owned, so there's a lot of opportunities for return to member to be greater than it is. And every year we do a day of service where we go into the high schools, and high school students use an app to basically, they get like a job, they get either a wife or a partner. They get to go to all these different stations, and basically like they tend to get the most expensive car or the most expensive house, and they go into debt. And then you have to go to the credit union to figure out how to get out of debt or get more credit. So they end up learning quite a bit during this exercise. So just having like a direct impact that I can see from day to day is what drives my interest to serve on a board or even find a job. The last thing I'll say is that our Seattle scene was sort of born out of my desire to create sort of a geography or a space for Black transplants as well as local Blacks to sort of find community. A lot of people, when I was a part of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, if they were new to the city, they didn't quite know where to get their hair cut or find a dermatologist that could deal with their skin, things like that. So our Seattle scene is an events and business marketing website, so you can see a Black business directory, businesses that cater to a Black population. And essentially it's just about creating community online. Other people can look at the calendar. It's not a Black only calendar, but essentially it's just one more way to feel connected to the city that is not always welcoming to outsiders, at least off first impression. I mean, you've all heard of the Seattle Freeze. And whether you believe it or not, a lot of people do experience it. I'm from Seattle, so I probably freeze people out all the time, unintentionally, but I'm just shy. Okay. But yeah, I sort of identify a problem, try to create a solution, and I have no free time. I serve on boards and I serve community as much as I can.
I'm an instigator. But for good. Like having worked in local government for almost 10 years now, which is crazy to think about that. I've started to realize where different policies have, as I said earlier, significant impacts on the community, and usually on the community who has less of an opportunity to actually shape what those own policies are. And so I think my goal is to connect people and to let them know and to give them a reasonable opportunity to be a part of the city that they live and contribute to. On the instigator side, I can probably think of two cases. A few years ago, there's not to get too wonky, but the Federal Highway Administration administers transit funding across the country. And so in our local community, there was a neighborhood in East Pasco was originally built for migrant housing, and then it got transitioned, and it's got it's great low barrier housing now. Gives people affordable housing, a place to live. But for some reason, the planners back in the day thought it was cool to locate them on the other side of the city next to no services. And so because there was no sidewalks and no other services next to them, transit said, well, it doesn't make sense for us to go out there. although it's public transit, not private transit. And so I was meeting with one of their neighborhood developers, and I had been working at my office for a few years, and I said, well, did you know that Title VI, through the Federal High Administration, tells you that you cannot disproportionately impact neighborhoods based on funding? And so I slipped them a little note pretty much and said, don't tell them you got it from me, but this is the law that they follow. Show up to their meeting and make your voice heard. And a year and a half later, they got a pilot project, and it wasn't until this past September where they actually were able to justify that this community was worth serving with transit. So even though they serve it now, it was kind of done out of, like, they needed multiple excuses to do it. And I'm sure the transit planners meant well, and it wasn't their fault that the community was built in the middle of nowhere. But that doesn't give them a right to not serve, even though technically they are tax-paying residents of the benefit district. And so those are things that 99% of most people don't care to know about, because people got lives to live. But for those of us that work in the field, it's our job to point that out, and people aren't following the rules to make them follow the rules. On the funner side, or a little bit more of a more fun event, this past summer I worked with a council member, and we worked with, I don't know how old these kids were, 8, 9, 10, 11, so is that like 4th, 5th grade? Rowdy kids, and we put these map templates on a big table. We bought a bunch of Legos, blue for commercial and jobs, red for variety of industrial, and green and yellow for different kinds of housing. And we said, build your city. There's a river, there's a mountain. Be a little logical, but you kids build the kind of city you want to, that you want to do. And it was really fun because for an hour these kids were building lift scooters and Lime bikes, and putting apartments on the island and saying we're going to build a bridge. And I'm thinking, I'm going to pay for the bridge, told people. But you give kids like an opportunity to actually build the neighborhood that you want to build. And then it was fun for us, but I get to take that back to my work and say, well, these are going to be the employees of our community in like 12 years. And if our city doesn't give them the kind of opportunities that they want to live in and the kind of life that they want to experience, then they'll leave us. And it's that simple. It's brain drain. Your kids will get educated somewhere else, and my city doesn't offer what I need. I don't want to live in that community. And so it's an economic development for us to build a kind of city that people actually want to live in, that they can afford to live in a place that they feel comfortable that they are a part of. And so I feel like if I can continue being a knowing but positive instigator, then I'll accomplish what I need to accomplish.
There are, of course, lots of other questions that I would want to ask you, but I want to make sure that we give time for questions from the audience. So, what would you most want to know from our geographers in practice?
Hi, I'm actually an alumni, and being back on campus is giving me a lot of anxiety, but in a good way. And when Professor Elwood tells you to come to a thing, you come to a thing. But me and my fellow geography alum and I were talking about how pivotal that year right after you graduate is. And I'd love to ask this panel, what did you do the year after finishing undergrad? Or, if you don't like that answer, what do you wish you had done to capitalize on all of the incredible things that you learned here in this department and figure out how to translate that to the greater Seattle context?
Go, 'cause mine's boring.
I bet that's not true.
No, I mean, I went straight to grad school. So I left Seattle, went to UCLA, but I did have to adjust to the warm climate. Yeah, so that was
Mine's also boring. I went right to grad school. But someone earlier today was asking me about, this is a common thing I think for a lot of people, about whether you take a gap year or if you're planning on grad school right away or not. I don't know the right answer, but I will say I think that there is a fine line between being exhausted from school and which point you might not get as much out of grad school versus just kind of going on your momentum and getting it over with. I definitely could have benefited from a gap year, but I'm also glad that I got it over with. So that's kind of an ambiguous answer, I guess.
I got kind of lucky. I had an internship with Seattle Public Utilities, and that carried a little bit after school, and then I got even luckier and ended up with an internship with the Puget Sound Regional Council in their data department. So I thought right after school that I was going to become real into GIS programming, Python, and software development, and then realized that no, I don't like that at all. I'm not good at that. I need to do something else. But it was fun. But I did that for 14 months or so after school.
Thank you all so much.
Hey, what's going on, guys? My name's Kevin. I was a grad way back in 2012. And funny enough, we still have email correspondence with the department, of course, so here I am. And I actually worked as a teacher, and now I'm in sales. Before that, I was a bartender. And before that, I was a valet. And before that, I worked in men's suit selling retail. So I've done a lot of things since I exited the beautiful halls of the University of Washington. But the question I had for all of you is, in the world of geography, right? And this is actually a question that I have as well. In the world of geography, or actually, let me walk this back a bit, right? In a perfect world scenario, we all want to do the things that we're really good at, that we enjoy doing, that someone will pay us to do, right? Let that sink in. So thinking about this, right? Geography is the what of the where, right? Looking for spatial arrangements. And it seems to me there's a litany of skill sets here. We have working as an auditor, obviously working in demography, working in urban planning. If there was some type of, I suppose, skill that you could really, that you would identify that you developed here in the geography majors that you were party to when you were in school here, what would you say that was? And I mean, how does it align with what you guys like to do? And how has it developed? It's kind of a long-winded question, but make of it what you will. Thank you.
I think for me, it's being able to tell a story on a map or on a Excel table or SPSS, if that's still around. I don't know. I think being able to tell a story off of data and connect that to the community. And being able to do that on a daily basis and tell people that this is important and here's the data or the map to prove it, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, good question. I would say I double majored in American Ethnic Studies and Geography, and just sort of being able to understand like different populations and the history of those populations was really useful. I would say in addition to that, just becoming a mixed method researcher, as you're thinking about like job skills or sort of not staying in the academic space, but working in city, county government, etc. Just really learning a methodology through and through, and then being able to speak to data insights or about changes in population was really useful for me.
I think the critical thinking or being able to have a theoretical and methodological basis to critically think, because if you don't know the data source, if you don't know how to find data to back up an observation or to back up your critical thought, you're not going to be taken seriously. And I think a lot of us, so I'll speak for myself, if you're naturally a critical thinker and you like asking the hard questions, you're not going to go as far if you don't have the ability to say, well, here's the data to back it up, and here's the method that I'm using. And yeah.
Hi. Going off of that and being able to critically use data, what's your most favorite use of like geographic data or like a map?
Yeah, I'm actually working on one right now. We have a problem in my community where we let developers build neighborhoods however they want. And so I was explaining this earlier. If you've ever flown into any city, basically, on the West Coast, you can tell where the city was laid out kind of in an orderly fashion, and you can also tell where somebody looks like they threw spaghetti on the wall, and that's the way the roads are going to look. Your cul-de-sacs, your roads that lead to nowhere, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm actually working with we have a GIS staff, so I'm working with them and our fire department to change our codes in the city so that developers aren't, unless there's like a mountain or a lake in the way, that you can't design your neighborhood that way, because we have neighborhoods where 30 feet away from their front door, there's shopping centers and Starbucks and all the cool stuff, yet because the way the subdivision is laid out, they gotta walk all the way around and through some weird neighborhoods and all the way to the main street where it sucks because cars are going 45 miles an hour to get a cup of coffee, so they can literally throw a baseball and hit the Starbucks, but it takes them 20 minutes to get there. And so we're working with some mapping and some routing that through the fire department that also says these neighborhoods are harder to serve. And if they're harder to serve, your insurance is going to be more expensive because it takes longer for the fire department to get there than the older neighborhoods. So it's kind of an interesting thing that's happened where the older neighborhoods are actually being more served by public services, which usually is the opposite, I think. So I think that's pretty cool, at least.
I'm not sure if I have a favorite one. The most recent one, I was working on an audit of a watershed management partnership in Eastern Washington to evaluate whether or not they'd improved stream flow. And, you know, for non-geographers, the question is about like measuring stream flow on some chart and then doing regression to see if it changed over time. But I think as a geographer, we know there's a lot of variables, and anyone who's a hydrologist, which I'm not, but I knows that there's tons of these variables that are impacting stream flow, whether it's rain, flow, you know, all these. And you know, instead of like having to be an expert at it, I just pulled a GIS model of our, you know, a geodatabase, and I just showed all the variables that are involved in this, and so sort of the team's then like, oh, this isn't as simple as just rainfall and these other things. And so anyway, it's not necessarily presenting it, but it's using that GIS data that someone else has already made, that is already formatted with all of the data you need, and just being able to quickly kind of present complex data. I don't know if that answers your question.
I would say for me, at the school district, through all the partnerships, so the city has a growth plan, the school district has a growth plan, the county has a growth plan, and through the partnerships, I was able to sort of, with our GIS analysts, create maps that sort of overlapped our geographies. So if they were going to build or create more density around an urban village, we could show how close it was to one of our schools. If there was a Seattle Housing Authority building going up or going down, we could see how close it was to one of our schools. So if there was going to be a boundary change, it's like, oh, we should reach out to this community, and also SHA. So just sort of like showing how it's all within the same city, and how our plans sort of line up or don't, and creating as much alignment around that as possible. I think because a lot of people have work streams that are parallel, but they're not quite intersected enough to make the impact that we need to make. So I would say partnerships, and then sort of showing how our geographies are the same and how we should sort of work together.
Thank you. Hi, I'm an undergrad currently, and I'm really grateful for the shares of where you guys have been able to practice and do this work and really test how to be a geographer out in these spaces. I guess my question really lies around, I think it's really cool that you guys get to do this work, but for a lot of people, it's still that first step to get into a space to, like, I do nonprofit work, and it took me a long time to figure out how the heck I could even get to the door. And one of my questions always is, as a geographer, like, how do I connect that to this kind of the first steps into applying myself into work, into a passion project, into a space that we're willing to accept the type of way I want to see things and do.
So are you asking about your career path and if it's the right one? Or?
I'm asking more of like, how have you guys done that? How have you guys made those first steps into asking for that job? Or I knew I wanted to do this. Or you guys knew that you wanted to do something, and then you asked a very specific space, like working for the city. But like, if I wanted to work for the city, I wouldn't know which part of the city I would like to work for. Like, how do you get to that first part of that step?
I applied for a lot of jobs. After I completed a second postdoc, and I didn't get a tenure track position. I just opened up my search to public sector, private sector, and I also taught for a year at Green River College. So you have to be open and then also sort of just see fit, because the employer will see fit as well. You know, like you can have an ideal job or location, but it still may not be a good fit for you. So I was just fortunate enough that my interest in public education and my geography background worked for the school district, and now having gained that experience, I now have more opportunities to where I'm a program manager and I've switched industries. So having those transferable skills that a lot of geographers have, sort of use that as to your advantage and create multiple resumes that sort of show and highlight different things. Could go more into like career advising, but see me after.
So I think there, being a little bit strategic in the types of internships you do. As an undergrad, I did an internship with a health nonprofit, and I took, when I went to grad school, I also took a public health class. And I didn't do that because I was like, this is the most interesting in the world. I was strategically thinking, hey, I like this type of work in the health field and I want to be open to it, and having a couple classes that are kind of fit that sort of niche would help me. I didn't go down that route, but I have done some of that work, and so that's sort of like one option that's still on the table. And then when it comes to GIS, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be the straight GIS analyst, so I got an internship. It was a pretty competitive one, but at a city. And I realized that was not for me. The production level GIS work is its own kind of thing, and I think some people do really well at it, but I wasn't. So instead of kind of going down that route and being like, I want to do GIS in a city as a GIS analyst, knowing that I would need extra skills like Python or some of these things, I realized that wasn't something that was within my sort of strengths. I could probably do it, but it would be a lot more work than I wanted to do to gain those level of skills to be a GIS analyst. And so it's sort of a lot of like back and forth of like, what are my own skills? What are my strengths? What do I need to work on? While also sort of building these different identities that you can go. I would have never thought I would work at an auditor's office because that sounds really boring. But the work was really interesting, and anyway.
I think for me, obviously all the stuff we hear from their teachers and advisors, persistency, ask questions, try hard, all that stuff. But really, it's all that times 10. We probably all applied for dozens of jobs, ones that we were qualified for, didn't get, ones that we were well qualified for and didn't get, ones that we definitely weren't qualified for, but at least it was a chance to work on the resume. I don't know how many jobs I sent out. There's also a risk that you have to be willing to take too, especially if it's something that you've identified as a passion of yours. If there's a problem that bugs you so much that you need to be the one to solve it, there is a risk in perhaps relocating to be able to solve it. And for me, it was moving to the Tri-Cities. I didn't want to leave Seattle. It's beautiful here, and I don't know if I can afford it anymore, but it's awesome here. And now I live in a much more smaller community, but that experience has allowed me to get even better at what it is that I love to do, and I enjoy it. I love my job. I'm very fortunate, and because I was persistent and annoying, I annoyed the people that made the hiring decisions just enough that they gave me an opportunity to come work for them. Said, well, you're complaining about us, we'll come fix it. So, all right, cool. And so I got real lucky, but it takes a combination of being willing to put yourself out there, take some risk, and your plan A doesn't always work out, and sometimes your plan B, C, and D don't work out either. And so you gotta constantly keep reevaluating your strategy on what are you going to do to be able to love what you get to do on a daily basis. And then do that.
Hi, I'm a parent of a student, and she dragged me along, and I am very grateful because this is very interesting. I have a question about, you all spoke about public policy and the importance of maps and data, and I'm curious, did you ever run into a situation where there were no data and it needed to be collected, and how did you get money for it? Because data is what drives the future, and maps and data are stuff that belongs together. And from a perspective of a public policy maker, taxes in this country aren't exactly high. So how do you get funds to get data that can change minds about things that you consider very important?
There's a lot of data out there. Not all of it is good. So I think if the necessity for it is enough, there's programs that can fund that data collection. For instance, in the state auditor's office, if we recognize that there's a spatial question and we need to answer it with spatial data, that gets built into the work plan and it's paid. We collect it. More often than not, it's more qualitative surveys or interviews and stuff like that. But so I can't speak for other areas, but at least if you can demonstrate there's a need for it. I think the problem, though, is so often there's a need for it, but you can't demonstrate the need for it if you don't have it. And I don't really have an answer for that.
I guess I'll go back to the school district for an example, but I think we haven't really talked about qualitative data, but I feel like that was a lot of the data that we collected. So if there was a big policy decision or something that could drive policy, we had to go out into communities and sort of say, this is what we're planning to do. And from that, you could collect feedback, you could put up a map, you can show like how this is impacting your neighborhood, there's comment cards, all that sort of participant observation that, you know, are people happy with this decision or are they not? And then we take all that data and we would sort of present it to the school board, who then gets to make a decision on basically 54,000 kids. So a lot of times staff will have data in-house or work with maps or work with qualitative data, but it's just like a very interesting space when you work for a school district or a public institution. Sometimes those numbers don't remain as pure as when you first got them, or even those testimonies could end up changing a whole decision altogether if the community unites around one decision versus another. So I think there's just a lot of opportunities to get information if you're paying attention. And so I would say a lot of data is free, and it just depends on. Say that again?
Time to collect the data is not free. I mean, I collect data and I know how much work goes into collecting good data, so.
Yeah,
It's
this
just-
would be after hours community meetings, so we did get paid for that. But if it's for the students, we sort of think about it as our jobs. And because I'm not in the academic space anymore, I can't really talk about timeline or funding in that way. But, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I guess data can be accessed free, but the census is technically free to download, but it's $1 billion federal program, right? Going back to asking questions, it probably also covers listening to what the answers are. So I got into it with a nice friendly discussion with our fire marshal because he was probably annoyed that I kept bringing up topics of walkability and compact development. And he said, where are you getting that the city wants this? Well, it turns out every 2 years the city does a community survey with like 101 questions, and one of them is what kind of built environment would you like to see? And it talks about, would you like to walk to work? Would you like to walk to the coffee shop? And we already have the data available, people just weren't looking at it. It's basically a wasted program that our staff wasn't utilizing. And so the next question is then, well, how do we know where people walk or bike? And that's a little bit more expensive to collect because historically, usually we only care about motor vehicles, but there's more and more data available that's expensive, but it will tell you how people are biking, how people are walking, time of day, origin, destination, all of that. To answer the question of it's expensive, well, whether it's reporting to a city council, your board, or your boss, whatever your higher level is, if it's important, then you need to demand that that data be collected. It is imperative for your job that you need this information. There's a kind of like a city planning jargon that says, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you care about.
We are coming, okay. Got one more question.
Hi. So I'm enjoying this a lot because I think I'm the only one here that's taught all three of you. And it's a thrill to see how well you've done, but it's not a surprise. You were good writers and engaged and asked questions, and it wasn't just, what are you looking for, which we sometimes hear. But what we often ask people who are successful is to think back, and if you could go back and do it again, what might you do differently? Or what do you wish you knew then that you know now? Because maybe those are the kinds of things that might be helpful for the people who are wondering, why do I need to be doing this assignment, and why there's so many assessments, and so on and so forth.
I would have been less stressed about grades. Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of pressure in school, and I think just trying, even though it's hard, to be comfortable with not being great at everything, and just accepting that. Because there were definitely classes I was not great at.
I would say being open-minded. I think I just was so worried about so many things. And I learned so much in a lot of the coursework from Suzanne and Mark Ellis. I ended up doing like the migration labor market track. I don't know what it looks like now. But I think just like thinking about those courses, the content in that sort of stuck with me throughout, sort of just thinking about environmental injustice and thinking about how to use data for good, not for bad. Thinking about a research question and who it impacts, and not just assuming I have the answers to everything, but doing all the work necessary to get at those answers. I think made me a stronger researcher and also, you know, a good employee at this point. So I would just say like a lot of the content from those early courses stuck with me, and then I had all of graduate school to sort of layer on top of that. But yeah.
I think I would probably say that really thinking about the coursework and your projects and how that has an impact on something that you're passionate about, which is a whole nother challenge in itself to identify what it is that you're passionate about. But once you find that, see if there's relationships between certain courses, whether it's the GIS and real technical stuff or more of the policy-oriented coursework or the documentation, whatever it may be, trying to find that relationship between the coursework and something that you're extremely passionate about. School's expensive, it's stressful, but you're at UW, a world-class university that in some ways opens up the world to you, and if you're able to take that experience and your passion and find what motivates you to, why go through all of this if you don't want to go make something better, is kind of how I would phrase it.
And I think you phrased it so well that strikes me as a really fantastic note to end on. So I want to, as we wrap up this evening, share a few forward-looking details. For those of you who are students, assuming that you're not graduating this year, every year you'll have a chance to take a couple of different career development and mentoring courses in the department. So keep an eye out for that. There's more information in your program. Alumni who are with us tonight, if you want to get involved in mentoring the next generation of geographers in practice, CV, see now. We have lots of opportunities. There's more in your program. And everybody is welcome at our winter quarter colloquium series, and it's in your program. So please join me in thanking our speakers, and we really look forward to seeing you again soon.